Thank you for watching. If you like what you see and hear, please subscribe and hit that bell button. Warning: everything you're about to see and hear comes from newspaper articles, court transcripts, and interviews with those involved. Thank you for watching. After analyzing LaMarcus Davidson's phone logs, police would turn their attention to Eric Boyd. While the others were hiding from police, Boyd brazenly walked the streets. He would be arrested on his way to deliver food to LaMarcus. Initially, Boyd denied knowing Davidson. Soon, however, he would change his mind and say he wasn't going to do any jail time for LaMarcus. While Daphne Sutton would lie to police, Eric Boyd would not. He saw an escape and decided to help police arrest the suspected ringleader of the murderous gang. Boyd pointed the detectives to a vacant house directly across from the Ridgebrook apartment complex. A for sale sign stood in the yard. Eric Boyd warned detectives, "LaMarcus has a gun." Around 3 p.m. on January the 11th of 2007, authorities surrounded the house at 1800 Reynolds Avenue. An armored vehicle approached. Its microphone system is used to order Davison out of the house. Davison emerges in the window. He places his hands on the window through the shades. Police order him to drop what he has in his hands and open the window. He yelled out that he couldn't. Davison is told to step back, and he did. The window is broken out and Davison is pulled through the opening. He cooperated before police took his handgun. LaMarcus Davison cried as he was led away in handcuffs. Initially, police had just two suspects, LaMarcus Davison and his brother Latavius Cobbins. That was about to change. Police were on the verge of raiding a house in Lebanon, Kentucky. Latavius Cobbins was tracked to 231 Shuck Avenue. It was the home of friend Natasha Hayes. While the suspects were there, they checked Knoxville news websites for updates on the heinous murders they had carried out. Soon they would find themselves trapped in the house, surrounded by law enforcement from several agencies. The suspects were ordered to come out of the house with their hands up. Natasha Hayes and Vanessa Coleman would be the first to surrender. Latavius Cobbins followed a few minutes later. Authorities noticed as someone peeked through the blinds upstairs. They entered the house and yelled for him to come down with his hands displayed. George Thomas did as he was told. All suspects were taken into custody without any trouble. With lengthy prison sentences looming in the distance, the suspects did what they could to help themselves. They would begin squealing on one another in hopes of saving their own necks. Each would tell bits and pieces of the truth while attempting to distance themselves from the horrible acts carried out against Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Attempting to dissect and connect the statements of the five suspects would be nearly impossible. No one will really know what happened at 2316 Chipman Street. LaMarcus Davison would pin it on his brother Latavius and his best friend George Thomas. He kicked them both out. Latavius and Eric robbed the Wishbones, but Eric had nothing to do with that double murder. LaMarcus would later confess to robbing a Pizza Hut. During the robbery, he attempted to snatch a woman's purse. As for George Thomas, he pointed the blame at everyone else. Eric Boyd, Latavis, and Lamarcus did the kidnapping. Davison and Boyd, well, they dealt with Christopher Newsom. As for Thomas, he sat around and smoked weed the whole time. Latavis Cobbins would pin things mainly on his brother. He would say that Lamarcus told him that he was going to do some crazy stuff. He wanted to carjack someone, get some money, and go on a robbery spree. He said that Lamarcus and Eric Boyd carried out the kidnapping and the carjacking. They were the real monsters. Vanessa Coleman would point the finger at George, Latavis, and Lamarcus. The trio did the carjacking, but it was Lamarcus and George who killed Newsom. Lamarcus tried to kill Channon Christian too. With the interviews going nowhere, investigators would have to rely on the physical evidence. Unfortunately, that evidence would be scant at best. If authorities were going to bring the suspects to justice, they would need solid forensic evidence. They would not get much. Semen would be found in Christopher Newsom, but that evidence was destroyed by the fire. DNA evidence from Channon Christian and her clothing confirmed that she had been raped by Lamarcus Davison and Latavis Cobbins. Lamarcus's fingerprint was found on the blank envelope in Shannon's vehicle and on 3 of the 5 plastic bags that contained her body. Davison's fingerprints were also found on items belonging to Channon and Chris, found in his home. Vanessa Coleman would be linked to Shannon's bindings. There was nothing linking George Thomas or Eric Boyd to the crimes, except for their statements and the statements of others. The multi-agency investigation was anything but perfect. It would be carried out by the Knoxville Police Department, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and the Knox County Sheriff's Office. With so much manpower and due to the heinous nature of the crime, it should have been flawless. Shannon's family requested help from law enforcement, but they were denied assistance. They were told that they would need to conduct their own search, and they did just that. Channon called her father at 12:33 a.m. on the day of the kidnapping. Cellular records confirmed that the call came from the Cherry Street area. Her father did not believe she was under any stress during the time of the call. The cell phone records would lead to the discovery of Shannon's vehicle. Did she make the call when she was kidnapped, locked up in Davison's house? Shannon's vehicle would be discovered on January the 8th around 1:30 and 2 a.m. While the vehicle was processed by Dan Crenshaw with the Knoxville Police Department Forensics Unit, nothing was found. 21 hours later, Crenshaw would inspect the vehicle's interior and find the envelope with the fingerprint matching to Lamarcus Davison. Around 10:30 a.m. and noon on Tuesday morning, KPD investigator Todd Childers gets the faulty warrant approved by Judge Stansbury. The search warrant was signed around 1 p.m. and officers entered the Chipman Street house at 1:39 p.m. Nearly 2 hours later, investigators were forced to leave the house to obtain a legitimate warrant. Why did it take so long to find the envelope? Could Channon have been saved if authorities would have acted sooner? The Chipman Street house was a complete mess. It is clear that the house had not been cleaned, yet investigators could find no proof that George Thomas or Eric Boyd had ever been there. No fingerprints or DNA. Channon Christian's panties were found in Davison's house in a bag with other clothing. Authorities held onto the panties and never tested them. In fact, They would go untested until August of 2009, nearly 2 years after the murders. Prosecutors later claimed that they didn't know the panties belonged to Christian until after Cobbins' trial. Why were the panties not tested much sooner? Knox County Assistant District Attorney General Leland Price would later admit that the panties were tested in hopes of implicating Eric Boyd. Instead, specialized DNA testing would discover 2 more semen samples in Christian's panties. Who did it belong to? Were there more suspects out there? At one point in July of 2009, it was discovered that audio tapes of conversations between Sutton and Davidson had gone missing. Transcripts of those calls would eventually be recovered and released, but only after they were brought to light. Finally, investigators were never able to find a murder weapon. Newsom had 3 bullets in his body. One was too damaged to analyze. The other 2 belonged to the same weapon. A gun was retrieved from LaMarcus Davidson. Police searched the house in Lebanon, Kentucky, but never found a gun. Latavas Cobbins' gun would only be found thanks to Natasha Hayes and a friend. Unfortunately, neither gun would be conclusively linked to the murder of Christopher Newsom. Would any of it matter in the end? By this point, the case had transformed into a firestorm, and things were about to get much worse.
On the next episode,
the Klan would rise again in Knoxville, Tennessee, and the media would fuel the fire. Vanessa and her mother would be put into protective custody after her name became public.